And hello everyone, welcome back to another tutorial. So first of all, when you get VS Code, it will most likely look something like this. So here, something like this. Now, let's first take a look at what exactly is everything here. And take note, I'm using this with the Dart programming language and Flutter extension installed. So a couple of my things might be a little bit different, especially if you're maybe doing Lua or JavaScript or something else. But in my case, I do have a lot of things here, and it's great because I can show you the extra things you may not have but get in the future. So first, let's start here. These are your sidebar menus. You can use them to quickly navigate between important items, such as File Manager. Here are your files in your project. So there you can see I have my Android files. Here's my lib, my models, my theme, my utils. So everything here can be found if we go here. If we right click on an empty space, we can say open containing folder. This is all that this is. So if I go into Inclined V3 here, this here is the exact same thing here. If I were to show the hidden files, you also see the .tools, .git, .github that you see here by default. So everything you see here is the same as everything you see here. So don't be intimidated by this. It's the exact same concept. You can create a new file, a new folder, refresh in case you change something and it didn't update. Click that, it refreshes everything here. And this is to collapse everything because sometimes you just have a very big project and you just want to close everything. Because if sometimes you go like this, then we go views, read book, search, we open up all of these ones here and like this. And it's just a lot, sometimes it gets overwhelming. Click that, closes everything out. This here is just extra options. You click on that, you can say what you want to see because here you have your outline. I never use this, but it can be useful in case you want to debug, which basically just means you want to make sure your code doesn't have bugs or you want to fix a bug in your code. You have timeline, which displays what changes were made. This, I believe, uses Git, but I also never really use that too often. And you have dependencies, and this tells you what dependencies this project has. Next up, you have your search. You can also access this by going Control-Shift-F, and this will also go here. Another useful feature is, let's say we double click on this, Control-Shift-F, it auto-populates that and it searches. And each and every file, you'll see it pops it up and you can find it wherever it was searched for. You can tick this to make sure it matches the exact same casing. Meaning if I do that, and we're in the bottom one here, if I go widget, it's going to remove it because this here is not the same as this here because the casing has changed. This one here, let's just save this. This one here is to match the entire word. If I do that, it means if I go widgets, it will still find this, but when I do this, it won't find it because this is the entire word it should match. Meaning this, if it has an S or something added to it, it's not going to be able to find it. Which one you use ultimately depends on what you are doing at that moment. This here is regex. It's a little bit more complex. My regex skills are horrible, so I never use it, but it can be very powerful if you're trying to find specific patterns in your code. Then again, you have refresh, you have clear search results, you have open new search editor, view as tree. So if you do that, you'll get a tree view, which is similar to this here. Some people might prefer this. I actually kind of like that. And then here you have this where they show it file, and here they also show which folder it's in. I'm gonna actually keep mine like that. And in here again, you can collapse everything to make it a little bit easier. Then you also have extra options, so you can specify which files to include and exclude. And I believe this also allows for some regex to make things easier. Here you have your source control, which can also be accessed by so if I go here, Control-Shift-G, open source control. Here you can actually see Control-Shift-E will open the Explorer. So you can switch between them with your keyboard if you wanted to. This is only really useful if you use Git. If you don't use Git, not a lot would be useful here. But basically, here we see we made a change. Okay, and we just added const to this icon here. Then I could say added const to widget. Do that. If I do a commit, then all of this, I could go git add dot and git commit -m. And let's resize this to make sure you can see this. Added const to widget. So basically, and we should do this to add it. So you click that plus, it says staged changes that would add it. If you do that, it will unstage the changes. But that's basically what this does. So that whole thing is that command. If you do that, we say commit, it will commit it. Once it's committed, it's basically git push, and you'll be able to sync your changes. That is what this does. So basically, it removes the need for a terminal in VS Code, especially when working with Git. This is very handy, especially if you're not great with Git. I learned Git from the get-go in the terminal, so I rarely use this, but it's a nice feature for those who don't know a lot about Git. If you click on this here, you can also see more options of what to do. Here you could maybe pull from a specific branch. I don't have any other branches, but you could if you ever had to. And here you can also see Git things. So here you can see I'm on the main branch. I have 1 commit that I need to push, 0 commits that I need to pull. And here you can see I have 1 warning and 10 infos. So if I click on that, I'll be able to see my infos and warnings. And there's live share. We'll get more to these later on, but this one is the Git. Then you have run and debug. Depending on what programming language you use, you might have to implement your own run and debug commands. And that's where the create JSON file is. Now this is a whole tutorial on its own, so I'm not going to go too deep into that. But because I'm using something like Flutter, I could just do that and it will start running it. I don't want it to start running right now, but if I wanted to, I could just click there and it would run. Or in this case, I could also click here, run, and choose debug or profile. But in some languages, you will need to add your own configuration to get this to run, also depending on which operating system you're using. And here, of course, you have your breakpoints. This is, again, if you're debugging, you can use this breakpoints here to make it easier to debug. So if I were to go like that, bump, you'll notice there's a breakpoint. Boom, there's no longer a breakpoint. Again, debug is something that can have its own whole tutorial, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. If you know how to use it, then you can use it. Here you have your extensions. Extensions basically extend the functionality of VS Code. By default, VS Code is just a very powerful text editor. But with the right extensions, you can make it an integrated development environment, an IDE, something that's great to work with programming. Such as here, I have a formatter for Python. I have bookmarks. So if I want to do bookmark something specific, I could. And you can, of course, search for specific ones. Be careful of the extensions you install. Just like with Chrome, if you install like an ad blocker or some sort of extension, it could be malicious. Everything that can be installed from online has potential to be malicious. So always be careful of what you install and don't just install things randomly. Maybe make sure it's from a legitimate source if you can. Then here's testing. So if you want to do some testing, and remember, you might not have all of these and you might have more of them. It highly depends on the language, the extensions, and what else you have here. But you're guaranteed to have the first 5 here. So that's for testing purposes. This is for Flutter, so this is part of an extension. The rest is all part of extension, so I'm not going to explain them. But this is where you'll basically have your quick settings. Here you could, of course, say what else you want, like Docker, and now Docker would be here as well. Not a fan of Docker being there. Also, I can remove the bookmarks. Here you can connect your account. I'm not going to click it because it has some details in here. But you can connect your account, and this will basically cloud save the extensions you have installed on VS Code. So when you install VS Code on a new machine and you connect your account, it will download all of the extensions you have in your previous one. Set the theming, do everything the same, meaning you don't need to configure everything again. So this can be very useful. And here you, of course, have your settings. So you click there, you'll be able to go to all of these settings and change what you want. Again, the settings are for you to play around with. I won't really go too deep into it, but you can go take a look at these and see. Something I will take a look at is user snippets. Here you can create snippets for specific programming languages, such as if we were to go Dart, then here we can add snippets. In our case, we do not have a snippet, but we could do this. So you're here to give us an example, and there's a log. So if I go here and I type log, here's the snippet we just created. So boom, and there we go. So this is just as an example of what we can have. So that's what this is and why it is useful. But again, this is another whole tutorial on its own, but something I want you to take note of. So when you see me get like these awesome auto completions at times, a lot of times it's because I configure this. For example, if I were to go here, user snippets and TypeScript React, you'll notice I have created a couple of them like RFC, which will create a basic React component for me, RC, which will create a class component for me, and so on. So a lot of these can be very useful and speed up the programming a lot. Next up, let's take a look here. Here we have the debug button. We already covered these. This will basically just start debugging or running and whatnot. You have the same up here. So there you have a debug button. If we click here, start debugging, run without debugging. You may not be able to use this depending on the language you use, extensions you have, and so on. So I might be able to click this, but you may not be. It highly depends on your setup and if it allows it. Here you also have your split editor, and this allows you to have multiple items open at the same time. This is insanely useful. Another way you can access that is by doing this. Just dragging this here, and it will automatically split it as needed. As you can see, and then you can have fun with this as you want. This tells you where you are. If I go there, I'm on line 18, column 37, line 19, 48, and so on. So that just tells you where you are. Here it tells you what type of indentation you're using. In my case, one indentation, meaning if I press tab, it should be 4 spaces. Then you have this, I have no idea what that is. This is the language you're using. So if you click that, you can change what language is being interpreted here. If I say C++, we're going to get a bunch of weird errors and stuff because none of this is valid in C++. Where we go here and I say Dart, everything's going to be back to normal. So this is the language you're using. This here, in my case, is just my emulators and stuff. So here's my phone and all the emulators I can use when coding. You may not have this. And the rest of these are basically just extensions. Again, not really too useful to know about unless you have these extensions. So that's upfront. That's what you get upfront by just looking at VSCode. Now let's take a look and dive deeper into a little bit more complex options. When you see me type a command, Control-Shift-P, then you'll notice I have a bunch of commands here. Like Pollock code. I can bring up Pollock code, I can select, and now I will have nice things here. Control-Shift-P, or by going Control and P and then adding a thing like this, you can start typing commands that you want to use. Control and P will allow you to switch between files very quickly. So let's say I want to go to book info widget. Boom. I don't have to go search here for it. I know the file exists. Quickly search for, let's say, not a robot. Boom. I'm now in this one. Makes it very quickly or very fast to switch between files as you need it. Control and Tab will, of course, switch you between these. And you can, of course, press Tab as many times as you need to switch between all of these. Most of the things you can do by just going up here and selecting what you want, such as file. Here you can create new files, new windows, open a file, open workspaces, save, save as. Speaking of save, a lot of people come to me and they tell me their code doesn't work, my tutorial is broken. However, a lot of times, I would say 80% of the time, when say they come to me with an issue, it is because they forgot to save their file. If I do this, you'll notice there's a little dot there. That means your file is not saved. File, save, the dot is gone. That is how you save the file and how you can also make sure the file is saved. If I do that, again, there's a dot there, Control S, or file, save, works perfectly. And I will remove it and tell you that it is fixed. You'll notice when I add things here, I get this green highlight here at the side. This is my Git telling me that this is new code. You'll also notice this changes color because the file has been modified. Again, if you know Git, this is useful. If you're not using Git, it won't be a lot of use to you. Then we can go to edit. Here you can do undo, redo, copy, cut, paste, find, replace, find in files, replace in files, and so on and so forth. Selection, you can select things. Another useful selection you can have is by going Control and D, Control and D, Control and D, and you'll notice it selects each version of these words. And here you can also specify the restraint. It's like a search. It then doesn't need to match the case. Does this need to be the whole word, or what do you want, you know? So if I select this, Control D will select all of these. And as you can see, there's no constraints, but if I say it has to be a whole word, select this, it won't select anything else because it's not a whole word. But if I do this, Control D, Control D, Control D, Control D, Control D, you'll notice I select all of them. And now I could do something like, and let me just reselect them because I deselected everything. Now if I do something like game, it will change them all at the same time. Again, here I could add multiple cursors by going Control and clicking. Wherever I click, I'll add cursors, and I could do something like this. Now I'm adding code and on multiple lines. That's how I do that. When I type, you'll notice things pop up, such as void my func or fun, that's fine, print, and you'll notice I get all of these things popping up. This comes from an extension. Usually, if you see me do this in Lua, it comes from the Lua extension. So if you go to your extensions, you search Lua, boom, now you'll find your Lua extensions, and you'll be able to read, if I click here, you'll be able to read the features it has, whatnot. The things you would be most interested in for things like that would be auto-completion. Because it helps you auto-complete your code like I just did there. It gives you like pop-up with a bunch of things. A lot of times it also gives you like a description. So here, descriptions. That is how I do that. If you ever wonder in my tutorials how I get these pop-ups, it's usually just an extension. Alright, then we have view. Here you can view a bunch of things. Again, it's up to you. Word wrap is what I usually like to turn on, because otherwise if I do this, I hate that. So what I usually do is I go and say view, word wrap, and we'll wrap the words to the next line basically. Very useful tool in case you also don't like having to scroll sideways in your code editor. Then you have go, which lets you go to places. You have run, which again is the same as basically this here, where you can run without debugging. If I go and run, you'll see the same options. You can toggle breakpoints, which is for debugging. Whole tutorial on its own, so I'm not going to focus on that. And here you can enable all breakpoints, disable them, remove them, and so on. And then the most asked question, or the most complained item I get on all of my tutorials, is I cannot have access to the terminal. I use Linux. Now, because I use Linux, I like the terminal I have. So I could do this. I could resize it easily. I could switch it without needing to use my mouse, my cursor. So it's just nice for me to use this. But a lot of times, Control, Shift, and in tilde, you have the exact same thing. They're both the same. Another thing you can do is say terminal, terminal, new terminal. There you go. Now you also have a terminal. It's the same thing. Echo, test. If I go copy that exact code, I get the same output. There we go. I also get asked, how do I get my terminal to look like this? I make it look good. In the description will be my configuration for my terminal. You can go check it out if you want it, and you can try and make yours look the same. Speaking of terminal, you also have debug console. So if you're debugging, then this here will basically allow you to see what is happening during running your program. You also have output. I never use this. I'm not really sure what this is used for. And in problems, here you can find like different problems in your code. For example, here I have _x, which I most likely used for some sort of debugging purpose or just testing whatnot, just telling me, hey, it isn't actually used. We create it and we assign it, but we don't use it. Here again, we're not supposed to invoke print in production code. It would be better to use debug print here. Or we could just remove it, problem solved. Now those problems are gone. And then finally, there's a big help button here. You can click it to get help on everything VS Code. So a lot of times, if you're not sure what to do or this tutorial didn't tell you something specific, the help button could help you as well. Here you have documentation, you have welcome, you have show all commands, editor, playground, show release notes, video tutorials. Click on that. You'll find a bunch of video tutorials right here. So if you're wondering about something, you're not sure if you can do it or something like that, a lot of times you can find it in the help section. Thank you for watching. I hope this tutorial helped you learn more about VS Code, and I will see you all again in the next tutorial.